he tells you that they practice Islam when he finds it to his liking better than any Muslim that he's ever encountered. He tells you as he moves from west to east that as an Islamic scholar, he has been welcomed and treated regally in every Islamic state in Africa. What is he talking about? He's talking about wealth. He's talking about power. He's also talking about title. We need to go back to Ibn Battuta, and we need to think about this other thing that becomes important. And that thing that becomes important is the question of being in a space like this, International House adjacent to the university community, and then Ibn Battuta as a scholar being treated as a scholar in these Islamic spaces, but then falling back on the Islamic Mecca of Africa itself. So, we think about Dal, we think about Janneh, we think about Timbuktu. We think about the centers of Islamic scholarship that were known not only in Africa, but as far east as Baghdad and as far west as Cordoba. Centers of Islamic some gorgeous, treasured names. Houses, libraries of manuscripts that in fact spoke to the very nature of what it meant to be Muslim. That is, to be a scholar, to train the mind. This is all taking place in Africa. These African places, these African spaces are antecedents for scholarship, not just simply Islamic scholarship, but scholarship elsewhere. Think about the transmission of knowledge that's supposed to be famous for bringing about the rise of the Renaissance, the European Renaissance. You know this, right? So here, what is supposedly lost is supposed to be reborn. Well, what is lost is the classics, all right? These great philosophers who come out of the Greek and Roman period. What has happened to these great philosophers is that they have been retained. They've been retained because they have been translated from Greek and Latin into Arabic. Now, how is that Arabic transmitted from the east to the west? What is, in fact, the physical corridor that one would think about that would take the knowledge of the Greek and the Romans in the far east of the Mediterranean basin and transport it to the far west? Physically. It's Arabic. It is the trans-Saharan trade. It is a trade that would pass through the centers of learning that are, in fact, the epitome of an African Islamic tradition. Ghana, Janneh, Timbuktu. You could not escape the place. Here, the Africanus tells us that books are more expensive in Timbuktu than anything else in the world. Knowledge is at a premium. If you wish to study among the best, come to this Islamic state. From Baghdad, from Damascus, from Cordoba, from Toledo. Come here, come here. So this is the legacy. This is a legacy that lasts up through the 16th, 17th century. We know this. But this is a legacy that has its elite formation. Islam needs to be spread among the people. And so Islam becomes revolutionary. It becomes revolutionized because of a class of, let's call them itinerant clerics, who decide that it is not good enough to have the Word of God resides simply in the houses of the rich and powerful. It must be, in fact, distributed among all men. So, these models, particularly in West Africa, have their own revolution. And their revolution is, in fact, to challenge the powers of the state, so to speak, the powers of state religion, the powers of the ulama, and to disseminate this religious tendency across the board. Now, they challenge other things as well. They challenge traditions that are inherent to West African culture. They challenge issues of slavery, sometimes on one side, sometimes on the other. And they go on to build, to help construct new traditions of Islam in these spaces, new translations, if you will, new interpretations, and of course, new states. And these new states is where I'm going to stop in terms of this particular talk, because these new states are the states that rub up against the cusp of modern imperialism. You know modern imperialism. The British, the French, the Germans, the Italians. At this particular moment in time, these are going to be the bodies of existence. These are going to be imperial formations in their own right that are going to wage struggle against empire. We have names like Sameh. We have the formation of the Caliphate, Sokoto. We have Katsina. We have the entire Jos Plateau, which even at the beginning of the 20th century is not a purview of British imperialism. We have our own things. We have our own ways of doing these things. We must, in fact, respect. Islam gives these things. It allows for, in fact, the refinement of these things within the framework of an African state. It moves into the future, into the 20th century, by formulating different kinds of religious and political sentiments that are going to be crucial to the coming independence of Africa itself. The one that I'm most familiar with is Senegal and the rise of Modibi. Crucial in terms of carving out space for resistance and negotiation, assumption of power, and the creation of a modern state. This is happening all over the state. It becomes critical to understanding that Islam in Africa is a fundamental part of the Islamic tradition that cannot be overlooked and that cannot be passed by in terms of understanding the sum total and the global dimensions of Islam as a whole. I'm going to leave you with one last tidbit, something that you might want to just muse on. Sitting here is the National House, University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the United States of America. Think about the United States of America before it was united, before it was state. Think about it as a colonial device. Think about it as, in fact, a part of imperial construction. Think about the ways in which empire, modern empire, could not, in fact, exist as we understand it without slavery, African slavery. Then ask yourself this question. Of those Africans who made that voyage, that long, arduous, horrendous voyage across the Atlantic, from West Africa, sometimes from East Africa, rounding the Cape, of those Africans, which percentage should we suppose were Muslims? The early documentation thus far indicates that probably in the very early years of the formation of the American Empire, the majority of the people brought to these shores so here, there are those connections that need to be made.
Allahu Akbar.
There is that notion that in this space, in this broad diaspora that we think of as daughters and sons of Africa, as people who in fact worship Allah, that there are these connections that can be made historically that need to be reiterated over and over again. And they need to be reiterated in relationship to a historical context that gives a new meaning to what we do and how we in fact regard ourselves at the present moment and in the future. With that, I want to thank you.
Excellently portrayed in the book Servants of Allah.
Yes. Yes.
I would recommend that to anyone.
Servants of Allah. Yes.
Thank you very much. Any question for or comment?
Yeah,